Consciousness returned to Leo in waves of agony, each pulse of pain behind his eyes like a hammer strike against his skull. The world swam into focus through a haze of grit and blood, his blood, he realized, tasting copper on his tongue. He was lying on cold, damp stone, the air thick with the stench of mildew, rotting meat and something else. Something animal. He tried to move, and every muscle screamed in protest. His wrists were raw, bound with coarse rope that had chafed through his skin. His ankles, too. He was trussed like a hog, lying on his side in a narrow tunnel that sloped downward into darkness. Flickering orange light came from somewhere behind him, casting long, distorted shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Then he heard the growl. Leo's blood turned to ice. He turned his head, slowly, agonizingly, and saw them. 3 goblins. They were exactly as the old fantasy games had depicted them, short, wiry, with greenish-gray skin and faces that were too wide, too full of needle-sharp teeth. Their eyes were yellow, with slitted pupils that gleamed in the firelight. They wore crude leather scraps and carried rusted weapons, a dagger, a club studded with what looked like human teeth, and a notched short sword. The one with the dagger was closest. It crouched a few feet away, watching him with a predator's patience. It licked its lips with a forked tongue, then made a guttural sound that might have been laughter. The other 2 were poking at a pile of bones in the corner, occasionally throwing a rock at each other. Leo's mind raced. He was in a cave. He was tied up. He was about to be eaten. His last memory was, nothing. A blank. He had been walking across campus, heading to the physics building for his graduate seminar on quantum field theory. Then a flash of light. A sensation of falling. And now this. Panic clawed at his throat. He tried to scream, but only a strangled croak came out. The goblin with the dagger perked up, its ears twitching. It shuffled closer, raising the rusty blade. The point was aimed at Leo's throat. And then something clicked in his mind. It was like a window opening in a dark room. A flood of information poured into his consciousness, blueprints, schematics, ballistic tables, material specifications. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he could summon a Glock 19. He knew its weight, 595 grams unloaded. Its length, 187 millimeters. Its magazine capacity, 15 rounds of 9 by 19 millimeters parabellum. He knew the exact amount of force required to depress the trigger, the precise trajectory of a 124-grain full metal jacket bullet at 25 meters. He didn't question it. He reached for that knowledge like a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. The gun appeared in his bound hands. It was solid, cold, real. The polymer grip fit his palm perfectly. The slide was matte black, with the unmistakable Glock profile. His fingers, though tied, found their natural positions, support hand cupping the firing hand, index finger resting along the slide, thumbs forward. The goblin with the dagger froze, its yellow eyes widening in confusion. It had never seen such a thing. The other 2 turned, dropping the bones, their ugly faces contorting into snarls. Leo didn't think. He didn't plan. He just acted. He twisted his wrists, bringing the gun to bear. The rope bit into his flesh, but he ignored the pain. His right index finger slipped into the trigger guard. He aimed at the closest goblin, the one with the dagger, and squeezed. The crack was deafening in the confined space. The slide cycled, ejecting a smoking brass casing that clinked against the stone. The goblin's head snapped back, a neat hole appearing between its eyes. It crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut. The other 2 goblins shrieked. One charged, raising its club. The other fumbled for a crude bow slung across its back. Leo's aim shifted. He fired again. The second goblin took the round in the center of its chest, a perfect heart shot. It stumbled, looked down at the wound in disbelief, and collapsed. The third goblin had the bow half-drawn when Leo's third shot took it in the throat. It gurgled, dropped the bow, and fell to its knees before toppling forward. Silence. The only sounds were the ringing in Leo's ears and the drip of water somewhere deeper in the cave. He lay there, breathing hard, the Glock still in his hands. The recoil had hurt. His wrists ached from the torque. His whole body was trembling. He felt weak, fragile, utterly human. He looked at the dead goblins. 3 shots. 3 kills. Perfect accuracy. But he wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was a physics grad student with a bad back and a caffeine addiction. He realized, with a cold certainty, that if any of those goblins had gotten close enough to touch him, he would be dead. A single scratch from that rusty dagger would probably give him tetanus, let alone a stab wound. His body was just as weak as it had been on Earth. Maybe weaker, after whatever had pulled him here. He had to get out of these ropes. He twisted, trying to reach the rope around his wrists with his fingers. The Glock was still in his hand, but he couldn't holster it, he didn't have a holster. He set it down carefully on the stone floor, within easy reach. Then he worked at the knots. It took 5 minutes of fumbling, cursing, and abraded fingers before the rope loosened enough for him to slip one hand free. He untied the other wrist, then the ankle bindings. He stood up, swaying, and immediately regretted it. His head spun. He braced a hand against the cave wall, feeling the cold dampness of the rock. He picked up the Glock. There were 12 rounds left. He checked the chamber, one in the pipe. Good. Now he had to find a way out. The tunnel behind him led upward, toward the flickering orange light. That was probably the entrance. He started walking, his bare feet, where were his shoes, stinging against the sharp stones. The tunnel curved, and the light grew brighter. He could hear voices now. Human voices. He slowed, pressing himself against the wall, peering around the corner. The cave opened into a larger chamber. A fire burned in a pit, sending smoke spiraling up to a crack in the ceiling. And standing around the fire were 4 people, 3 men and a woman, all armed, all wearing leather armor and carrying weapons. Adventurers, by the look of them. They were staring at something on the ground. Leo followed their gaze. It was the goblin he had killed first. The body had been dragged here, presumably by the other goblins before he woke up. The adventurers were examining it, poking at the bullet wound with a dagger. One of them, a tall woman with dark hair tied in a severe ponytail and a long sword at her hip, looked up. Her eyes met Leo's. For a moment, no one moved. Then the woman raised her hand, palm out, in a gesture that was clearly meant to be non-threatening. "You," she said, her voice low and steady. "Step out slowly. Show me your hands. And tell me what that thing is." Leo hesitated. He was still holding the Glock. He could see the tension in the adventurers' bodies, hands on sword hilts, a bow being raised slightly. They were wary. They were scared. He had no idea if they were friend or foe. But he was outnumbered, outgunned in a magical sense, and one wrong move could end him. He took a deep breath, stepped out into the firelight, and held up his free hand. "I'm not a threat," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm just trying to survive." The woman's eyes narrowed. She studied him, taking in his bound raw wrists, his bare feet, his disheveled appearance. Then she looked at the dead goblin, and back at the strange metal object in his hand. "That thing," she said, pointing at the Glock. "It killed these goblins." Leo nodded. "From a distance?" Another nod. The woman exchanged glances with her companions. Then she looked back at Leo, and something like respect, or maybe calculation, flickered in her eyes. "I'm Ilara," she said. "Captain of the Thornwall Adventurers. You've got a lot of explaining to do." The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Thornwall as Leo was marched through the town gate. His wrists were still raw from the goblin rope, but at least they'd let him keep his dignity, no shackles, just 4 adventurers flanking him like he was a dangerous animal. Ilara walked ahead, her hand resting on the hilt of her long sword, her leather armor creaking with each step. The town smelled of bread and smoke, a sharp contrast to the damp cave where he'd woken up. Children stopped playing to stare at the stranger in strange clothes, a t-shirt and jeans, now torn and stained with goblin blood. An old woman crossing the street made the sign of a crescent moon over her chest, muttering a prayer. Leo felt every pair of eyes like a weight on his shoulders. They stopped at a 2-story building with a wooden sign that read, "Thornhall, Guild of Adventurers." The door was heavy oak, studded with iron nails. Inside, the common room was filled with rough-looking men and women nursing mugs of ale or polishing weapons. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, wood smoke, and cheap stew. Ilara gestured to a chair at a corner table. "Sit." Leo sat. His body ached from the walk, and his hands were still trembling from the adrenaline crash. He watched as the adventurers gathered around, forming a loose semicircle. A few of them held crossbows, fingers near the triggers. They weren't taking chances. "Name," Ilara said, her voice flat. "Leo." "Where are you from, Leo?" He hesitated. A place called Earth. Far from here. Earth, she repeated, as if tasting the word. Never heard of it. What are you? A mage? A summoner? He shook his head. I have a skill. I can summon weapons. Advanced ones. Show me. Leo looked around the room. The adventurers tensed. He took a deep breath and focused, reaching into that strange space inside his mind where his inventory resided. He willed a weapon into existence, not the Glock, but something that would make an impression. A bolt-action rifle, its wooden stock polished and its barrel gleaming. It materialized in his hands with a soft thump. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few adventurers drew their swords. Thornwall is on the frontier, she said. The demon lord's forces have been pushing north. We've lost 3 villages in the last month. The king's army is stretched thin. We need every advantage we can get. She leaned forward. I can get you those ingredients. But in return, I need you to take contracts. Assassinations. Sabotage. Long-range support. You'll be a ghost, no one will know you exist. Do you understand? Leo nodded slowly. I understand. Good. I'll have the alchemist draw up a list of what you need. You'll stay at the Sleeping Boar Inn, room 7. Don't leave town without telling me. She stood, then paused at the door. One more thing. If you die on your first mission, I'll have wasted my investment. So don't die. Leo sat alone in the empty guild hall, the rifle resting across his knees. He felt the weight of the day pressing down on him, the exhaustion, the hunger, the gnawing fear that he was one mistake away from oblivion. But he also felt something else. Hope. A thread of it, thin and fragile, but there. He gathered his weapon and walked to the Sleeping Boar Inn. The innkeeper, a stout woman with kind eyes, showed him to a small room with a straw mattress and a single window overlooking the street. He locked the door, placed the rifle under his bed, and collapsed onto the mattress. Sleep came quickly, but it was restless. He dreamed of goblins, of blood, of a shadowy figure whispering his name. A sound woke him. A soft rustle, like paper sliding under a door. Leo's eyes snapped open. He lay still, listening. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of moonlight through the window. He heard nothing else. Slowly, silently, he slid off the bed and crawled to the door. A piece of parchment lay on the floor. He picked it up and held it to the moonlight. The handwriting was neat, precise. It read, "The demon lord pays well for new toys. Meet me at the old mill if you want to live." Leo's blood ran cold. He read it again, then a third time, as if the words might change. His hand trembled. He glanced at the window, at the dark street beyond, and felt the fragile walls of his room closing in. Someone knew. Someone had seen his demonstration, or heard the rumors, and now they wanted to exploit him, or kill him. Either way, he couldn't stay here. He grabbed the rifle, checked the chamber, and crept to the window. The old mill was a black silhouette against the starry sky, a half-mile outside the town walls. A trap, probably. But maybe also an opportunity. He didn't have a choice. If he didn't go, they'd come for him. And in a close-quarters fight, he was already dead. Leo opened the window, swung his legs over the sill, and dropped into the alley below. The cobblestones were cold under his bare feet. He crouched in the shadows, the rifle in his hands, and began to move. Leo didn't sleep well. The note was still crumpled in his pocket, its ink-smudged letters burning a hole in his thoughts. The demon lord pays well for new toys. He'd seen enough crime dramas to know a trap when he smelled one. No, the old mill could rot. He had more pressing matters, like finding a way to stop being a one-hit kill waiting to happen. The morning air of Thornwall was crisp and smelled of wood smoke and damp cobblestones. Leo pulled his cloak tight, scanning every shadow as he made his way down the main street. His hand hovered near his waist, where he could summon the Glock in a heartbeat. Paranoia was a survival trait now. The alchemist's shop was a cramped, cluttered den of glass vials and dried herbs. A bell jingled as he pushed open the door, and an old man with spectacles perched on a bulbous nose looked up from a mortar and pestle. "Help you?" the alchemist grunted, not pausing his grinding. Leo stepped forward, keeping his voice low. "I need a body-fortifying elixir. The real kind, not a street vendor's tonic." The alchemist's hand stopped. He set down the pestle with a soft clack and studied Leo with rheumy eyes. That's not something you buy off a shelf, boy. The ingredients are rare. A phoenix feather, a mandrake root from the shadowfen, and, the hardest part, the still beating heart of a wyvern, harvested within an hour of death. Leo's stomach tightened. Wyverns. He'd seen their silhouettes in storybooks, but here they were real, flying death machines with scales like armor. How much for the full brew? The alchemist snorted. Gold won't buy you that. You'd need a noble's treasury, or a favor from the crown. Even then, the wyvern heart alone would cost you a small fortune. A knot formed in Leo's throat. He'd hoped for a simple transaction, but this was a quest, not a purchase. He turned to leave, mind racing, when the door burst open. Elara strode in, her leather armor creaking, her hand resting on the hilt of her short sword. She nodded at the alchemist, then fixed her sharp eyes on Leo. I figured I'd find you here. Come on, we need to talk. Outside, the morning bustle of Thornwall flowed around them as Elara led him to a quiet alley. She crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. I heard you asking about the elixir. That stuff's not for casual drinkers. You planning on surviving a fight? Leo met her gaze. Something like that. Then I have a deal for you. She pulled a rolled parchment from her belt and unfurled it. It was a crude map, marked with a red X near a mountain pass. Bandit warlord named Garrick. He's been hitting the eastern trade route for months. The kingdom's hands are tied, too many troops needed at the border. They've put a bounty on his head, 500 gold crowns. Leo studied the map. You want me to kill him? I want you to do what you showed me yesterday, Elara said. From a distance. No one needs to know how it happened. The bounty will cover the elixir ingredients, plus a down payment for the alchemist's work. Leo's heart pounded. A long-range assassination. No direct combat, no chance of a stray arrow. It was perfect. I'll do it. But I need supplies, a good vantage point, and no interference. Elara smirked. I figured. There's a hilltop 2 miles east of the camp. Clear view, no cover for them to return fire. You leave at noon. By the time the sun hung high and harsh, Leo was crouched behind a cluster of boulders on that hilltop. Below, the bandit camp sprawled in a shallow valley, a motley collection of tents, a central fire pit, and a crude wooden palisade. He counted at least 30 men, some sharpening blades, others gambling. And there, near the largest tent, sat a hulking figure in battered plate armor, Garrick. Leo's breath fogged in a cool air. He summoned his suppressed sniper rifle, a sleek, matte-black weapon with a heavy scope. The weight was familiar, comforting. He chambered around, the bolts sliding home with a whisper of metal on metal. Through the scope, Garrick's face came into sharp focus. He was laughing, slapping the back of a subordinate. Leo adjusted for windage, calculated the drop over 500 meters. His finger rested on the trigger. Asterisk 1 shot. 1 kill. No mistakes, asterisk. He exhaled, half pressing the trigger. The rifle bucked gently against his shoulder, the crack muffled by the suppressor. The sound was a flat thwip, lost in the open air. Through the scope, Garrick's head snapped back. A spray of red painted the tent behind him. The bandit lord crumpled, dead before he hit the ground. For a moment, chaos reigned below. Men shouted, drew weapons, looked around wildly. But no one looked up. They had no idea where the shot came from. Leo allowed himself a thin smile. He lowered the rifle, began disassembling it to stow away. Asterisk 1 down. Elixir, here I come, asterisk. Then a streak of brilliant orange light shot into the sky from the center of the camp, a magical flare, burning with angry energy. It hung for a moment, then exploded into a pattern of embers. Leo's blood went cold. That wasn't a random signal. He grabbed his scope and peered down. The bandits were no longer panicking. They were organizing, pointing toward the eastern pass. And from that pass, a column of dust rose, a second force, larger than the first, marching with purpose. They called for reinforcements. Leo's hands trembled. He had seconds, maybe minutes, before the new arrivals swept the area. And he was alone, on a hill, with no cover and nowhere to run. He slung the rifle over his shoulder and started moving. Fast. The hilltop was no longer safe. Leo scrambled down the reverse slope, his boots sliding on loose gravel as the distant roar of the bandit camp erupted into chaos. He could hear the war cries, the clatter of hooves, dozens of riders, maybe more, spilling out from behind the palisade. The flare still hung in the sky, a crimson eye that seemed to track him. He found a narrow crevice between two boulders, just wide enough to crouch in. His heart hammered against his ribs. He pressed his back against the cool stone, forcing his breathing to slow. Think. The bandits had seen Garrick die, but they didn't know where the shot came from. The flare was a signal, probably to a larger force waiting in the woods. But how did they know his general direction? He peeked over the ridge. The bandit camp was a swarm of torches now, at least 50 men mounting horses. And in their midst, a figure in dark robes raised a staff. He broke into a sprint, zigzagging down the hill toward a cluster of old oaks. A third fireball slammed into the ground where he'd been a second before, the concussion throwing him off balance. He stumbled, caught himself on a tree trunk, and kept running. The mage was good, too good. Leo needed to break the spell's lock. He reached the tree line and dropped prone behind a fallen log. The rifle's bipod clicked into place. He peered through the scope, scanning the camp. The mage was standing on a wooden platform near the center, staff raised, eyes scanning the hillside. The distance was at least 800 meters, a long shot even for this rifle, but Leo's perfect aim made it possible. He exhaled, slow and steady. The crosshairs settled on the mage's staff, just below the crystal. If he could destroy the focus, the spell would collapse. The trigger felt cold against his finger. He squeezed. The rifle roared, a thunderclap that echoed across the valley. The recoil punched his shoulder, but he kept his eye on the scope. The bullet struck true, the staff shattered in a burst of splinters and light. The mage stumbled back, clutching his head, the glowing crystal falling to the ground in pieces. The fireball that had been forming dissipated into harmless sparks. But the bandits were still coming. Horsemen poured out of the camp's gate, a tide of leather and steel. Leo cursed. He couldn't outrun them, and he couldn't let them get close. He summoned his light machine gun, a heavy, belt-fed beast with a bipod and a 100-round drum. He set it on the log, braced his shoulder, and opened fire. The first burst caught the lead rider square in the chest, throwing him from his saddle. Leo swept the barrel left and right, stitching the line of horsemen with controlled bursts. Horses reared, men screamed, and the charge faltered. He kept firing, the guns chatter a continuous roar, until the drum ran dry. He summoned another, slammed it home, and resumed. The bandits scattered, seeking cover behind trees and rocks. Leo had bought himself time, but he was running out of ammunition, and out of options. Then he heard it, the thunder of hooves, but from behind him. He spun, heart in his throat, but the banners were familiar. Ilara's cavalry, a wedge of steel and horseflesh, cresting the hill. They swept past him, lances lowered, and crashed into the disorganized bandits. The battle turned into a rout. Leo watched from behind his log, the machine gun smoking in his hands, as the bandits broke and fled. Ilara herself rode through the chaos, her sword flashing in the torchlight. Within minutes, it was over. The surviving bandits were either dead or captured. Ilara trotted over to Leo, her horse snorting steam in the cold air. She looked down at him, her expression unreadable. "You're alive," she said. "I didn't expect you to survive that mage." Leo let out a shaky laugh. "Neither did I." Her lieutenant, a wiry man named Corvin, rode up beside her. "How did you do it?" he asked, his eyes narrow with curiosity. "That mage could sense life force. He should have been able to track you like a hound." Leo hesitated. The answer clicked into place with a cold certainty. He had no mana. In a world where magic was tied to life force, his lack of magical signature made him invisible to certain senses, but it also made him a ghost, a blank spot in the fabric of the world. A double-edged sword that could save him or doom him. "I don't know," he lied. "Maybe he was just a bad shot." Corvin didn't look convinced, but Ilara waved him off. "We'll talk later. For now, we have prisoners to process and a bounty to collect. Good work, Leo." She rode away, leaving Leo alone with his thoughts. He stared at the shattered staff in the distance, the dead mage lying beside it. He had won, but the victory felt hollow. The mage had nearly killed him. The next one might not miss. And somewhere, in a castle far to the east, a shadowy figure was listening to a report. "The gun god is mortal," the voice whispered. Find his weakness. The morning sun cast long shadows across Thornwall's cobblestone streets as Leo stepped into the alchemist's shop, the bell above the door chiming a thin, tinny note. The air inside was thick with the smell of dried herbs and something metallic, like old blood left to cure. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with jars of preserved organs, vials of viscous liquids, and bundles of withered roots. At the counter, a hunched figure in a stained leather apron looked up, his eyes sharp and assessing. "You're the one they're calling the gun god," the alchemist said, his voice a dry rasp. "Name's Aldrich. Heard you been busy." Leo nodded, feeling the weight of the coin pouch at his belt. "I need a body-fortifying elixir. The recipe calls for a wyvern heart, among other things. I was told you have one." Aldrich's lips curved into a thin smile. "I do. But it's not for sale. At least, not for coin." Leo's hand instinctively moved toward his hip, where the Glock 19 rested in its holster. "What do you want?" "A favor," Aldrich said, turning to a cluttered workbench. He picked up a piece of parchment, yellowed and cracked at the edges. "There's a mine to the east, the old crystal vein. It's been overrun by a pack of crystal golems. The miners fled, and the guild's been wanting to clear it out for weeks. But every party that's gone in has come back in pieces, or not at all." Leo studied the map Aldrich spread across the counter. The mine was marked with a red X, a network of tunnels spiderwebbing into the hillside. "What makes you think I can do it?" "Because you're not a mage," Aldrich said bluntly. "The golems feed on mana. The more magic you throw at them, the stronger they get. But a bullet? That's just metal and fire. No magic to absorb." He tapped the map. "Bring me the heart of the largest golem, and the wyvern heart is yours." Leo's jaw tightened. He had no choice. Every day he spent without the elixir was a day he could die from a stray arrow, a misplaced step, a sneeze at the wrong moment. "Fine. I'll need supplies." An hour later, Leo stood at the mouth of the crystal vein mine, a pack slung over his shoulder containing a grenade launcher, armor-piercing rounds, and a suppressed sniper rifle. The tunnel yawned before him, dark and cold, the walls glittering with veins of crystal that caught the faint light from outside. He took a breath and stepped inside, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor. The air grew colder as he descended, the crystals on the walls pulsing with a faint, internal light. He moved slowly, his senses on high alert, the Glock in his hand. The tunnel branched into 3 paths, and he paused, listening. From the left passage came a low grinding sound, like stone against stone. He followed the sound, rounding a corner to find a wide chamber. In the center stood 3 crystal golems, their bodies faceted and translucent, light refracting through them in rainbows. They were humanoid but larger, their arms ending in jagged spikes. As Leo watched, one of them turned, its head swiveling with a crackling sound, and fixed him with a gaze of pure malice. Leo didn't hesitate. He raised the Glock and fired 3 shots, aiming for the center golem's chest. The bullets struck with a sharp crack, but instead of shattering, the crystal absorbed the impact, the holes sealing almost instantly as new crystal grew to fill the gaps. The golem let out a sound like breaking glass and charged. "Of course," Leo muttered, holstering the Glock and unslinging the grenade launcher. He fired a single round at the ceiling above the golems. The grenade exploded, showering the chamber with debris and collapsing a section of the tunnel. The golems were buried under tons of rock, their grinding screams cut short. Leo waited, listening. The dust settled, and silence returned. He reloaded the grenade launcher and approached the rubble, his heart pounding. One of the golems had been partially crushed, its arm and head visible, but the crystal was already beginning to regenerate, knitting together with a soft, crystalline hum. He switched to the sniper rifle, loading armor-piercing rounds. He aimed at the exposed head of the golem and fired. The bullet punched through, but the wound began to close. He fired again, and again, each shot slowing the regeneration but not stopping it. He needed to destroy the core. He remembered Aldrich's words, the heart of the largest golem. He scanned the rubble until he saw it, a pulsing, gem-like orb in the chest of the largest golem, still partially buried. Leo aimed carefully and fired. The armor-piercing round struck the core, and the golem shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. The other 2 golems, their connection to the core severed, stopped moving, their crystal bodies crumbling to dust. Leo let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He moved forward, picking his way through the rubble, and retrieved the core, a fist-sized crystal that pulsed with a warm, inner light. It was heavy in his hand, and he could feel a faint vibration, like a heartbeat. He turned to leave, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. As he stepped out of the chamber, a shard of crystal, dislodged by his passage, fell from the wall and sliced across his cheek. He felt the sting, the warmth of blood trickling down his face. He touched the wound, his fingers coming away red. He was alive. But the drop of blood that fell to the floor was a reminder of how fragile he was. 1 inch to the left, and the shard could have taken his eye. 1 inch deeper, and it could have severed an artery. Leo wiped the blood away and stepped out into the sunlight, the golem's core clutched to his chest. He had the heart. Now he just had to survive long enough to use it. The moment the crystal shard sliced his cheek, Leo's world narrowed to a single, terrifying point of stinging pain. He dropped the core, clapping a hand to his face, feeling the warm trickle of blood seep between his fingers. His heart hammered against his ribs as he stumbled back, scanning the darkness for more falling debris. The tunnel was silent now, the dust from the collapse settling like a pale shroud over the shattered golem. He forced himself to breathe. It was just a scratch. A shallow cut. But the thought that a stray shard, something he hadn't even seen coming, could have ended him sent a chill down his spine that no amount of adrenaline could warm. Leo fumbled in his pack for the small jar of healing salve Aldrich had given him as a precaution. The alchemist had called it a minor restorative, good for cuts and burns but useless against deep wounds. Leo unscrewed the lid, the sharp herbal scent filling the damp air. He dabbed a fingerful of the thick, green paste onto his cheek, wincing as it stung. The bleeding slowed almost immediately, the skin pulling together with an odd, tingling tightness. He waited, counting his heartbeats. When he finally lowered his hand, the cut was no longer bleeding, but a thin, pale line remained, a scar. Leo traced it with his fingertip, a grim reminder that even a paper cut could be fatal in this world. He had survived a goblin ambush, a corrupt noble's guards, a bandit warlord, a mage assassin, a wyvern rider, and now a crystal golem. But this tiny, insignificant wound, was the closest he had come to death since the vampire assassin's blade had nearly gutted him. He picked up the gold. The journey through the forest was uneventful, but Leo's paranoia was at an all-time high. Every rustling leaf, every distant bird call made him flinch. He felt his muscles tighten, his skin tingle, his bones ache as if they were being stretched. The scar on his cheek itched violently. When the sensation faded, Leo flexed his hands, expecting to feel stronger, faster, invincible. But he felt the same. He looked at Aldrich, a question forming on his lips. "It's a partial formula," Aldrich said, before Leo could speak. "The wyvern heart and crystal core will double your durability. You can now survive a minor hit, a scratch, a bruise, maybe a weak spell. But a direct sword strike, a fireball, a fall from a height, those will still kill you." Leo's hope curdled into frustration. "You told me this would make me stronger. I need to survive a real hit." "And you will," Aldrich said, unperturbed. "But the full elixir requires 2 more ingredients, a phoenix feather and a hydra scale. The phoenix feather will grant you regeneration, not instant, but enough to heal from non-lethal wounds in minutes. The hydra scale will harden your skin to resist physical attacks. Combined, they will make you nearly as tough as a knight in full-plate armor." Leo's jaw tightened. "Where do I find them?" "The phoenix roosts in the Ashfall Peaks, 3 days' journey east. The hydra lairs in the Swamp of Sorrows, to the south. Both are extremely dangerous. I would not recommend attempting either alone." Leo opened his mouth to argue, but a loud knock at the door interrupted him. The bell jangled as the door swung open, revealing a man in royal livery, a messenger, his face flushed from riding hard. He held a rolled parchment sealed with crimson wax. "Leo Thornwood?" the messenger asked, his voice breathless. Leo blinked. "I go by Leo. What's this about?" The messenger thrust the parchment into his hands. "By order of King Aldrin, all able-bodied adventurers are to report to the front lines immediately. The Demon Lord's army has crossed the border. You are drafted." Leo unrolled the parchment, his eyes scanning the words. The seal was genuine. The order was absolute. He looked at Aldrich, then back at the messenger. "I'm not a soldier," Leo said. "I'm a researcher. A hunter." "You are registered as an adventurer of Thornwall," the messenger replied. "The king's decree applies to all. You have 3 days to report to Fort Dusk." Leo's hand drifted to the scar on his cheek. He had barely survived a falling crystal shard. Now he was being sent to war. He looked down at the parchment, then at the alchemist's workbench, where the two missing ingredients seemed as distant as stars. 3 days, Leo muttered. I'll need a faster horse. The road to Fort Duskhold was a scar across the land, a muddy ribbon winding through fields turned to ash. Leo walked beside Alara, the stern captain of Thornwall adventurers, her hand resting on the hilt of her longsword. Behind them, a column of conscripts and seasoned mercenaries trudged in silence, their faces grim. The sky was the color of bruised iron, and the air smelled of smoke and distant rot. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. His body felt lighter since Aldrich's elixir had taken effect, a strange warmth that promised he could survive a scratch now, but not a direct hit. The thought offered little comfort. He scanned the horizon constantly, his eyes searching for movement among the blackened trees. Every shadow seemed to hide a blade. Fort Duskhold emerged from the haze like a broken tooth. Its walls were massive, grey stone streaked with soot, and the gatehouse was a hulking beast of iron and timber. But as they drew closer, Leo saw the cracks. Siege engines, crude trebuchets and battering rams, lay scattered in the field before the fort, some still smoldering. The defenders on the battlements moved with a sluggish weariness that spoke of sleepless nights. A horn blared from the gate tower. The portcullis groaned upward, and a man in battered plate armor rode out on a horse lathered with sweat. His name was Captain Varn, a grizzled veteran with a scar running from temple to jaw. He reined in before Alara. "You're late," Varn said, his voice like gravel. "The Demon Lord's vanguard hit us at dawn. We lost the outer wall." Alara nodded. "We brought what we could. 50 swords, 20 bows, and 1 specialist." She jerked her head toward Leo. Varn's eyes narrowed. "This boy. He looks like a scribe." "He's the one they call the gun god," Alara said flatly. Varn snorted. "I've heard rumors. A man who kills from a mile away. I thought it was fairy tales." He studied Leo with open skepticism. "Can you prove it?" Leo met his gaze. "Give me a tower with a clear view of the field. And tell your men to keep their heads down." Varn hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me." The fortress interior was a maze of narrow stairs and cramped courtyards. Soldiers huddled around cook fires, sharpening blades or mending armor. The smell of blood and sweat was thick. Leo climbed the eastern tower, his legs burning from the ascent. At the top, a chill wind whipped his hair. He unshouldered his pack and knelt behind the parapet. Below, the battlefield spread out like a nightmare. Orc warbands milled around siege towers, massive wooden frames on wheels, each one crawling with green-skinned warriors. Trolls lumbered among them, their skin like stone, carrying clubs the size of tree trunks. And in the sky, a wyvern circled, its rider a dark silhouette against the clouds. Leo exhaled slowly. He summoned his scoped rifle, a bolt action with a heavy barrel and a scope that could read a fly's wings at 1,000 yards. The stock settled against his shoulder, familiar and cold. He chambered around, the metallic click loud in the quiet. He tracked the wyvern rider through the scope. The creature was immense, its scales a sickly green, its wings beating with a leathery rustle. The rider wore black armor and carried a lance tipped with flame. Leo adjusted for wind and distance. His finger rested on the trigger. But he didn't aim for the rider. He aimed for the saddle strap, a thin line of leather connecting rider to mount. The crack of the rifle split the air. The wyvern screamed. The strap snapped, and the rider tumbled backward, flailing. He hit the ground with a wet crunch. The wyvern, suddenly free, wheeled and dove. Its jaws closed around a fallen rider, and the beast tore him apart in a spray of blood. The orc army roared in confusion. Leo didn't pause. He cycled the bolt, ejected the spent casing, and aimed at the nearest siege tower. From his pack, he pulled a grenade launcher, a single-shot tube that fit over the rifle's barrel. He loaded an explosive round, the metal casing heavy in his hand. He aimed at the base of the tower, where the wooden supports met the ground. He fired. The round struck with a thunderous blast. The tower lurched, then collapsed in a shower of splinters and screaming orcs. The second tower followed a minute later. The third. By the time the smoke cleared, the orc advance had stalled. The surviving soldiers on the walls cheered. Leo slumped against the parapet, his hands shaking. The rifle dissolved into motes of light. He had done it. But the cost was always the same, a piece of his calm, a fragment of his humanity, traded for survival. Night fell like a shroud. The fortress settled into an uneasy quiet. Leo found a corner in a storeroom, his back against a sack of grain, his eyes fixed on the door. He didn't trust the silence. He had learned that stillness often preceded the worst violence. A candle guttered in its holder. The shadows seemed to breathe. A whisper, soft as silk, brushed his ear. The demon lord sends his regards. Leo spun, his hand reaching for a pistol that wasn't there. A figure stood in the doorway, a woman with pale skin and eyes like blood rubies. She smiled, revealing fangs. The vampire assassin had found him. She moved faster than he could track. One moment she was 10 feet away, the next, her hand was around his throat, lifting him off the ground. Her grip was iron. Leo choked, his vision darkening at the edges. Fragile, she purred. So very fragile. He clawed at her wrist, his mind racing. He couldn't summon a gun, not in time. But he could summon something else. A flashbang. The metal cylinder materialized in his palm, and he pressed the button. The world went white. The vampire screamed, her grip loosening. Leo fell, gasping, and scrambled backward. He summoned his Glock, fired 3 rounds into her chest. She staggered but didn't fall. The bullets punched through her, but she healed almost instantly. Clever, she hissed, blinking away tears. But not clever enough. She lunged. Leo rolled, his shoulder slamming into a crate. He came up with a shotgun in his hands, a short-barreled Remington, loaded with buckshot. He fired point-blank into her face. The blast tore through her skull, and she crumpled, twitching, her body dissolving into ash. Leo stood there, panting, the shotgun smoking. The storeroom was silent. The candle had gone out. He was alone. But he knew it wasn't over. The demon lord had sent an assassin. And she had found him. That meant the enemy knew his weakness. They knew he was mortal. He looked down at the pile of ash. The elixir had bought him time, but not safety. He needed the phoenix feather. He needed the hydra scale. He needed to become something more than a man with a gun. Outside, the wind howled. The siege would resume at dawn. And somewhere in the darkness, the demon lord was watching. The claw tore through the bedroll with a sound like ripping silk, scattering feathers into the moonlit air. Leo's instinct screamed a full second before his conscious mind caught up. He was already rolling, his shoulder slamming against the cold stone floor as he twisted away from the shadow that had been standing over him. He didn't see her. He saw only a blur, a distortion in the darkness that moved faster than anything human. His hand found the shotgun before his eyes could focus, and he fired blindly into the space where she had been. The blast echoed through the small storeroom, deafening in the confined space. Pellets tore into crates and sacks, sending splinters and grain spraying across the floor. But the laugh that followed was already coming from behind him. So quick, the voice purred, feminine and cold. But so blind. Leo spun, racking the pump action. The vampire Lilith stood by the door, her pale face illuminated by a sliver of moonlight from the high window. Her lips curled into a smile that showed too many teeth. She was dressed in dark leather, her movements fluid and predatory. Blood still stained her chin from the guard she had drained earlier. He fired again. The pellets passed through empty air as she vanished, reappearing on the ceiling above him like a spider. Her nails, more like claws, gouged deep furrows in the stone where he had been standing. "Close," she whispered, her voice a breath against his ear. Leo threw himself forward, crashing into a stack of barrels. Pain flared in his ribs, but he ignored it. His mind raced, analyzing the geometry of the room, the distances, the angles. She was too fast. In close quarters, she could teleport faster than he could track. He needed space. He needed time. He scrambled to his feet and ran for the door. The vampire laughed again, the sound echoing off the walls as she gave chase. He burst into the narrow corridor, his boots skidding on the flagstones. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with torches that cast dancing shadows. At the far end, a heavy oak door led to the armory. Running, her voice came from behind him, closer now. How disappointing. Leo didn't answer. He ducked into a side room, a storage closet filled with old furniture and broken weapons. His hands moved with practiced precision as he summoned a roll of tripwire and a handful of flashbangs from his inventory. He worked in the dark, trusting his memory and a faint glow of moonlight filtering through a crack in the wall. He strung the wire low across the doorway, then anchored it to a leg of a heavy table. He attached 3 flashbangs to the wire, their pins pulled and secured with small loops of string. If the wire snapped, the pins would release, and the flashbangs would detonate. It was a crude trap. But it was all he had time for. He retreated to the far corner of the room, behind an overturned wardrobe. He summoned the shotgun again, checking the load. Buckshot. Good for close range. But he needed something more. He reached into his inventory and pulled out a single silver-tipped slug, a custom round he had crafted from a melted-down silver coin. He chambered it, the metallic clicked loud in the silence. The vampire appeared in the doorway. She paused, her eyes scanning the room with predatory intelligence. She saw the tripwire almost immediately and smiled. Clever, she said. But predictable. She stepped over the wire with effortless grace, her movements fluid and silent. Leo held his breath. He had expected her to trigger it. But she was too experienced for that. She walked into the center of the room, her head turning slowly as she searched for him. Come out, little gunman. I promise I'll make it quick. Leo didn't move. He waited, his finger resting on the trigger. She took another step, and her foot brushed against a loose board. The board tipped, and a stack of old chairs clattered to the floor. The noise startled her, just for a fraction of a second. Her eyes flicked toward the sound. That was all Leo needed. He fired. The shotgun roared, and the silver slug tore through the air. But she was already moving, twisting aside with supernatural speed. The slug grazed her shoulder, tearing through her leather armor and drawing a line of black blood. She hissed in pain, her eyes locking onto his position. You'll pay for that, she snarled. She lunged, covering the distance in a blur. Leo didn't have time to rack the pump. He threw himself sideways, rolling behind a stack of crates. Her claws raked across the wood, splinters flying. He scrambled to his feet and ran for the door, leaping over the tripwire. He landed in the corridor and turned, racking the shotgun as he moved. The vampire followed, her eyes blazing with fury. She stepped through the doorway, and her foot caught the wire. The flashbangs detonated with a blinding white light and a deafening crack. The vampire screamed, clawing at her eyes as she stumbled backward. Her teleportation faltered as she lost her bearings. Leo didn't hesitate. He raised the shotgun and fired at her legs. The buckshot tore into her thighs, shredding muscle and bone. She collapsed, her screams turning into guttural howls of rage and pain. She tried to crawl, dragging herself across the stone floor, but her legs were useless. Leo walked toward her, his footsteps steady. He racked the pump, ejecting the spent shell, and chambered another silver slug. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with hatred and fear. You think this ends it?" she spat, blood bubbling from her lips. "The demon lord knows your weakness now. He knows you're just a fragile little human." Leo aimed the shotgun at her heart. "Good. Let him come." He pulled the trigger. The silver slug punched through her chest, and she dissolved into ash, her body crumbling like a dried leaf. The dust settled on the floor, and the corridor fell silent. Leo lowered the shotgun, his hands shaking. He leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths. His heart pounded in his chest, and his legs felt weak. He had survived. Barely. As the last remnants of her ash swirled in the torchlight, a faint whisper reached his ears, like a breath from beyond the grave. "The demon lord knows your weakness, he will send a curse you cannot shoot." Leo's blood ran cold. He stared at the pile of ash, but the voice was already gone. He turned and walked back toward the main hall, his mind racing. The vampire was dead, but her words lingered like a shadow. A curse he couldn't shoot. What did that mean? He didn't know. But he had a feeling he would find out soon enough. The morning sun cast long shadows across the stone floor of Leo's rented room in Thornwall. He sat on the edge of a creaking cot, staring at his left hand. A black mark, no larger than a thumbprint, had appeared on the back of his hand during the night. It was a perfect circle, filled with intricate, spiraling runes that seemed to shift and writhe when he looked directly at them. A cold, damp sensation radiated from the mark, as if someone had pressed a piece of ice against his skin and left it there. He rubbed it with his thumb. Nothing. He tried to scrape it off with a knife, the blade passed over the mark without effect, leaving the skin unbroken. He even held his hand over a candle flame for a few seconds, gritting his teeth against the heat. The mark remained, untouched, while the surrounding skin reddened from the burn. Damn it, Leo muttered, shaking his hand to cool it. The mark pulsed once, as if alive, and the cold sensation deepened. He felt a faint tugging at the back of his mind, like a thread connecting him to something distant and malevolent. Lilith's final words echoed in his memory, a curse that cannot be shot. This was it. A tracking curse, placed on him when the vampire had touched him during their fight. He hadn't noticed it in the chaos of the battle. He dressed quickly, strapping his Glock 19 to his thigh and slinging a suppressed sniper rifle over his shoulder. The weight of the weapons was familiar, comforting even. But the mark on his hand was a reminder that his greatest enemy wasn't a bullet or a blade, it was magic. And magic, unlike lead, could not be aimed. He found Alara in the fort's main hall, a cavernous room with a long oak table covered in maps and reports. She stood near the fireplace, a cup of mulled wine in her hand. Her stern face softened slightly when she saw him, then hardened again when she noticed the mark. "What's that?" she asked, setting down her cup. Leo held up his hand. "A tracking curse. The vampire put it on me before she died. I can't remove it." Alara's eyes narrowed. She took his hand, turning it over to examine the mark. Her calloused fingers traced the runes, and she let out a low breath. "This is dark magic. Demon Lord's work. Only a high priest of the Church of Luminara can dispel it. The nearest temple is in the capital, 3 days' ride from here." "I don't have 3 days," Leo said. "The moment I step outside, whoever put this curse on me will know exactly where I am." Alara released his hand and crossed her arms. "Then you stay inside the fort. The anti-magic wards will block the curse's signal, at least temporarily. But they won't last forever. The Demon Lord's forces are gathering for a siege. We have maybe a week before they arrive." Leo paced the length of the hall, his boots echoing on the stone. A week. Trapped in a fort with no way out, waiting for an army that could track him like a bloodhound. He needed a solution, and he needed it fast. "There's another option," he said, stopping in front of Alara. "I use the curse as bait." Alara raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "The Demon Lord wants me dead. He's sent assassins, monsters, everything he has. But he doesn't know exactly where I am right now, he only knows the general direction. If I leave the fort, he'll send his best hunters after me. I can lead them into a trap." "And what kind of trap can you set that can kill a teleporting hellhound?" Leo's lips curled into a thin smile. "I have something new. Something I haven't used yet." He summoned a weapon in his mind, a sleek, shoulder-fired tube, painted in olive drab. An M72 Law rocket launcher. The image solidified in his hand, the cold metal of the launcher pressing against his shoulder. The warhead was a shaped charge, capable of penetrating several feet of steel. Against flesh and bone, it would be devastating. Alara stared at the weapon, her eyes wide. "What in the nine hells is that?" "A rocket launcher," Leo said. "It fires a high-explosive projectile that can destroy a building. Or a siege weapon." He lowered the launcher, resting it on the table. "The Demon Lord has a forward camp about 10 miles east of here. They're stockpiling siege weapons, catapults, battering rams, trebuchets. If I can destroy that cache, the siege will be delayed by weeks. Maybe long enough for reinforcements to arrive." Alara shook her head. "That camp is heavily guarded. Scouts report at least 200 soldiers, plus a dozen ogres and a pack of hellhounds. You'll be dead before you get within a mile." "I won't get within a mile," Leo said. "I'll be 3 miles away, on top of the ridge overlooking the camp. The rocket launcher has a range of over 1,000 meters. I can hit the cache from there and be gone before they know what happened." Alara was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "It's insane. But it might work. I'll gather a squad to escort you to the ridge. We'll set up a diversion to draw their attention." "No," Leo said. "I go alone. The curse will lead them straight to me. If you're with me, you'll be caught in the crossfire." "You're not invincible, Leo," Alara said, her voice sharp. "One mistake and you're dead." "I know," he said. "That's why I have to be perfect." An hour later, Leo slipped out of the fort through a hidden postern gate, the rocket launcher slung across his back. The land beyond the walls was a patchwork of rolling hills and sparse forests, the ground still damp from the previous night's rain. He moved quickly, staying low, using the terrain for cover. The curse on his hand pulsed with each step, a constant reminder that he was a beacon in the dark. He reached the ridge by midday. The demon lord's camp sprawled in the valley below, a chaos of tents, fires, and crude wooden structures. At the center of the camp, a massive stockpile of siege weapons stood under guard, catapults with iron-bound wheels, battering rams with iron heads, and trebuchets with counterweights the size of houses. Leo lay on his stomach, peering through the scope of his sniper rifle. He counted the guards, 20 around the cache, plus a patrol of hellhounds that circled the perimeter. The hellhounds were large, black-furred beasts with glowing red eyes and teeth like daggers. They moved in a pack of 6, their heads low to the ground, sniffing for intruders. He switched to the rocket launcher, resting it on a rock to steady his aim. The weapon was simple to use: extend the tube, flip up the sights, and pull the trigger. He lined up the shot, aiming for the center of the cache, where a massive trebuchet stood surrounded by barrels of pitch and bundles of arrows. His finger tightened on the trigger. The curse on his hand flared with heat, and he felt a sudden pull, as if something had locked onto his location. The hellhounds below lifted their heads, their red eyes turning toward the ridge. They let out a synchronized howl, and then they vanished, teleporting in a blur of black fur and fire. Leo pulled the trigger. The rocket launcher bucked against his shoulder, a loud whoosh followed by a trail of smoke. The projectile streaked across the valley, a blur of white-hot fire, and struck the cache dead center. The explosion was immense, a fireball that rose hundreds of feet into the air, consuming the siege weapons in a wave of flame and shrapnel. The ground shook, and a shockwave rolled over the ridge, knocking Leo flat. He scrambled to his feet, slinging the empty launcher over his shoulder. He had to move. Now. But before he could take a step, a ripple of heat appeared in the air behind him. The hellhounds materialized out of thin air, their massive bodies blocking his escape. There were 6 of them, their eyes blazing with hunger. The largest, a beast the size of a horse, stepped forward, its lips curling back to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. Leo's hand went to his Glock. A pistol against 6 hellhounds. He had seconds to think, to act, to survive. The lead hellhound lunged. The M72 law hissed as the rocket streaked across the sky, a tail of fire that carved a line through the dusk. Leo didn't wait to see the impact. He was already turning, the empty launcher clattering to the rocky ground as a second weapon materialized in his hands, a compact M79 grenade launcher, its stubby barrel aimed at the dirt at his feet. The trigger clicked, and a 40mm canister punched into the earth, detonating in a cloud of white smoke and pulverized stone. The shockwave slapped his back, shoving him forward as the smoke billowed, a thick, acrid curtain that swallowed the ridge. He ran. Boots skidded on loose gravel, his lungs burning as he pumped his arms, every instinct screaming at him to find cover. The curse on his left hand throbbed, a black, spidering web that pulsed with a sickly heat, as if it were alive. He could feel it, a beacon, a signal fire blazing in the void, calling something to him. Something fast. The first howl tore through the air behind him, a sound that was less animal and more a shriek of tearing metal. Leo's heart slammed against his ribs. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He just ran, the M79 reloading with a click of his mind, another round materializing in the breach as he ducked behind a boulder. A flash of black fur and molten eyes erupted from the smoke. The hellhound was massive, the size of a horse, its body wreathed in faint embers that left scorch marks on the stone. It landed where he had been standing, claws gouging furrows in the rock. Leo didn't hesitate. He swung the grenade launcher up and fired from the hip. The round hit the beast's chest and detonated, a thunderclap that sent it tumbling backward, its ribcage a mess of splintered bone and black ichor. But even as it fell, 2 more emerged from the smoke, their eyes fixed on him with an intelligence that was cold and calculating. "Shit," Leo hissed, scrambling to his feet. He vaulted over the boulder, his mind racing. 6 of them. He'd seen 6 in the moment before he fired the rocket. The first was down, but that left 5. And they were fast. Too fast for an open fight. He needed terrain. He needed a bottleneck. His eyes scanned the landscape. To the east, the ground sloped into a series of jagged ravines, the walls of which were narrow and steep. A canyon. It was risky, if they cornered him, he was dead, but it was his only chance. He sprinted toward it, his legs burning as the ground turned to loose scree. Behind him, the howls grew closer, the sound of claws on stone a constant, scraping rhythm. He reached the mouth of the canyon just as a hellhound lunged. Leo threw himself sideways, his shoulder slamming into the rock wall as the beast's jaws snapped shut where his neck had been. The hot breath washed over him, reeking of sulfur and decay. He fired the M79 point blank into its side, the explosion hurling it against the opposite wall. It lay still, but he didn't stop to check. He pushed deeper into the canyon, the walls closing in until they were barely 10 feet apart. This was it. The kill zone. He stopped, turned, and summoned the weapon he had been saving. It materialized in his hands, a bulky, heavy device with a cylindrical tank and a long nozzle. An M2 flamethrower. The weight of it was immense, the fuel tank pressing against his back as he aimed the nozzle at the canyon's mouth. He could hear them now, the scrabbling of claws, the low, guttural growls that echoed off the stone. They were hurting him. Smart. But not smart enough. The first hellhound rounded the corner, its molten eyes locking onto him. Leo pulled the trigger. A jet of liquid fire erupted from the nozzle, a roaring stream of orange and blue that filled the canyon. The hellhound didn't have time to dodge. The napalm splashed across its face, igniting its fur, its flesh, its bones. It howled, a shriek of agony that was cut short as it collapsed, thrashing. Leo kept the trigger depressed, sweeping the flame across the canyon floor, turning the narrow passage into an inferno. The second and third hellhounds tried to leap through the fire, but the heat was too intense. Their fur ignited mid-air, and they crashed to the ground, rolling and screeching. The fourth hesitated at the edge of the flames, its eyes darting, calculating. Leo adjusted his aim and bathed it in fire. It fell, a writhing mass of black and orange. Then the fifth appeared. It didn't charge. It stood at the edge of the flames, its body shimmering, and then it was gone. Teleportation. Leo's blood ran cold. He spun, the flamethrower's nozzle swinging wildly, but the canyon was empty. Where was it? His breath came in ragged gasps, the heat from the flames pressing against his skin, making it prickle and sting. He could feel the curse pulsing, a dull throb that seemed to mock him. A sound behind him. A whisper of air. Leo dropped to one knee and spun, the flamethrower's nozzle coming up just as the hellhound materialized, its jaws open, inches from his face. He pulled the trigger. The flame caught it in the throat, and the beast's body convulsed as it was thrown backward, its head engulfed in a ball of fire. It hit the ground and did not move. Silence. The only sound was the crackling of the flames and the hiss of burning flesh. Leo let the flamethrower fall from his hands, his arms shaking, his skin red and blistered from the radiant heat. He stumbled forward, his eyes scanning the canyon floor. The bodies of the hellhounds lay in twisted heaps, their black ichor sizzling as it mixed with the napalm. He knelt beside one, the heat still radiating from its corpse, and grabbed a fong. It was long, curved, and sharp as a dagger. He shoved it into his pack. He had proof. He had survived. But as he limped out of the canyon, the curse on his hand still throbbing, he couldn't shake the feeling that the hunt was just beginning. 3 hours later, Leo stumbled through the gates of Fort Thornwall, his clothes singed, his skin blistered, and his eyes hollow. Elara met him at the gate, her face pale as she took in his condition. By the gods, Leo. What happened? He handed her the fawn. Hellhounds. 6 of them. They're all dead. She stared at the fawn, then at him, a mix of awe and horror in her eyes. You killed 6 teleporting hellhounds? Alone? I had a flamethrower, he said, his voice flat. Is the priest here? She nodded. Father Aldrich arrived an hour ago. He's in the chapel. Leo followed her through the fort, his body aching with every step. The chapel was a small stone building, lit by candles that cast flickering shadows on the walls. A man in white robes stood before the altar, his face lined with age and wisdom. He turned as Leo entered, his eyes immediately falling on the black mark on Leo's hand. Show me, Father Aldrich said, his voice soft but commanding. Leo extended his hand. The priest took it, his fingers tracing the edges of the curse. His face grew pale, his brow furrowing. He muttered a prayer, and a faint golden light emanated from his palm, but the curse only pulsed in response, a dark, hungry thing that seemed to laugh at the attempt. After a long moment, the priest released Leo's hand, his face ashen. He looked up, his eyes filled with a fear that Leo had never seen in a man of faith. This is no mere tracking curse, Father Aldrich said, his voice barely a whisper. This is a soul mark. It is bound to your very essence. It will not fade, it cannot be removed by any means I possess. And it will attract him. Leo felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Who? The priest swallowed hard. The demon lord himself. The morning air carried the scent of iron and earth. Fort Thornwall's walls bristled with archers and mages, their faces pale under the grey sky. Leo stood on the parapet, his breath misting in the cold. Below, the courtyard churned with activity, supplies being hauled, weapons sharpened, and runners darting between command tents. Ilara had been up all night, her voice hoarse from barking orders. She found him at sunrise, her armor dented and her eyes red-rimmed. "They're 3 days out," she said, handing him a rolled parchment. "Scouts spotted the vanguard at dawn. At least 2,000, maybe more. And that's just the front wave." Leo unrolled the map. The terrain around Fort Thornwall was a jagged maze of canyons and limestone ridges, a natural fortress that had held against countless sieges. But the Demon Lord's Legion wasn't a conventional army. They had flying beasts, shadow mages, and creatures that could scale cliffs like spiders. He traced a finger along the northern approach, a narrow pass called the Serpent's Tooth, flanked by steep walls of rock. "This is where they'll come," he said. "It's the only path wide enough for siege equipment. If I can collapse the cliffs on both sides, I can funnel them into a kill box." Ilara studied his face. "You're planning something insane, aren't you?" "I'm planning something that might work." He rolled the map and handed it back. "I need a magical cannon. One that's broken or outdated. And I need it moved to the ridge overlooking the Serpent's Tooth. We have an old dwarven cannon in the armory. It's been rusting for years, the firing mechanism is cracked." "Perfect. It doesn't need to fire. It just needs to look like it could." By midday, Leo had his decoy. The dwarven cannon was a monstrous thing of brass and iron, its barrel as thick as a man's torso. He positioned it on the highest ridge, angled toward the pass, and draped it with canvas to make it appear camouflaged. Then he set to work on the real trap. He spent the afternoon laying a line of explosive charges along both cliff walls. Each charge was a sealed clay pot filled with black powder and shrapnel, connected by a single fuse that ran back to his sniper perch. He tested the fuse 3 times, each time lighting a short segment to measure burn rate. When he was satisfied, he coiled the main line and hid it under a layer of loose stone. His perch was a natural hollow in the rock, 50 meters above the canyon floor. It offered a clear view of the entire pass, with multiple escape routes leading into the deeper caves. He set up his semi-automatic rifle, a modified M1 Garand with a telescopic sight, and laid out 8 clips of armor-piercing rounds. Each bullet was hand-loaded with extra propellant, designed to punch through magical barriers and enchanted plate. Night fell like a black curtain. Leo didn't sleep. He sat in the hollow, listening to the wind, his hand resting on the rifle's stock. The sole mark on his chest pulsed with a dull ache, a constant reminder that somewhere out there, the Demon Lord was watching. Dawn broke red and angry. The first sounds of the Legion reached him before the soldiers did, a low, rhythmic drumming that vibrated through the stone. Then came the dust, rising in a thick cloud from the Serpent's Tooth, and finally the army itself. They marched in perfect formation, their armor black as oil. At the front rode a dozen knights on nightmare steeds, their helms crowned with horns. Behind them came ranks of infantry, their shields locked, their spears glinting. And at the center of the column, lumbering like a metal beast, was a siege tower on wheels, its sides covered in runes that glowed with sickly green light. Leo waited. He counted the seconds, timing the march to his fuse. When the head of the column reached the midpoint of the pass, he pressed the igniter. The fuse hissed to life, a thin trail of sparks racing along the cliff face. Leo watched it through his scope, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. The sparks reached the first charge. Nothing happened. His heart stopped. He checked the fuse line, but it was too dark to see. Had the powder gotten damp? Had a rock pinched the line? The Legion kept marching, the siege tower rumbling forward. He had one chance. If the explosives failed, he'd have to retreat and abandon the fort. Then the first charge detonated. The explosion was a thunderclap that shook the entire canyon. A wall of rock and dust erupted from the cliff face, sending boulders tumbling into the column. Horses screamed. Knights were thrown from their saddles. The second charge went off, then the third, a chain reaction that ripped along both sides of the pass. The cliff walls collapsed in a cascade of stone, burying the front half of the Legion under tons of rubble. Leo didn't wait to admire his work. He chambered around and found his first target, a knight who had survived the collapse, scrambling to rally his men. The crosshairs settled on the knight's exposed throat. Leo exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the canyon. The knight's head snapped back, and he crumpled. Leo cycled the bolt and aimed again. Another officer fell. Then a mage who was raising a shield. Then a standard-bearer. Each shot was deliberate, economical. He worked through his clips methodically, reloading behind the cover of the rock, never exposing himself for more than a second. Below, chaos reigned. The survivors were leaderless, trapped between the rubble and the advancing dust cloud. Some tried to climb the debris, only to be picked off by Leo's rifle. Others fled back through the pass, trampling their own wounded. The siege tower had toppled, its runes flickering and dying. Leo was reloading his third clip when he felt it, a shift in the air, a pressure that pressed against his eardrums. The dust cloud in the distance parted, and a figure stepped through. He was tall, 7 feet at least, his body encased in armor that seemed to drink the light. Black flames coiled around his shoulders and crown, leaving trails of shadow in the air. His face was hidden behind a helm of polished obsidian, but his eyes burned like twin coals. He raised one hand, and the flames gathered in his palm, condensing into a sphere of pure darkness. The demon lord had arrived. Leo didn't hesitate. He dropped the rifle and grabbed the grenade launcher from his pack. He loaded a high-explosive round, aimed at the ground 10 meters in front of the demon lord, and fired. The shell arced through the air and detonated in a burst of shrapnel and fire. The demon lord didn't even flinch. The explosion washed over him like water over stone. He pointed a finger at Leo's hilltop. A beam of dark energy screamed across the distance, faster than sound. Leo dove sideways, rolling into the hollow as the beam struck the ridge. The rock exploded, sending shards of stone slicing through his coat. He felt a sharp sting across his ribs, a cut, shallow but bleeding. He scrambled deeper into the cave, his heart pounding. The beam had missed by inches. From outside, he heard a voice, deep and resonant, that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I see you, gun god. Your glass body will shatter soon enough." Leo pressed his back against the cave wall, his hand clamped over the bleeding wound. The soul mark burned like a brand. He had bought the fort time, but he had also confirmed the demon lord's worst suspicion: he was mortal. And now the hunt was truly on. The world dissolved into a roar of black and white. Leo didn't see the beam coming, he felt it, a pressure wave that turned his bones to glass before the light even touched him. His body moved on instinct, a physics grad student's desperate calculation of trajectory and time. He dove sideways, not away from the beam, but into the trench he'd dug 3 hours ago, a shallow grave he prepared for exactly this moment. The hilltop behind him ceased to exist. The air turned to plasma, and the ground buckled like a struck drum. Leo hit the dirt floor of the trench hard, the breath punched from his lungs as a cascade of rubble and soil buried him alive. Darkness. Silence. Then the ringing started, a high-pitched whine that seemed to come from inside his skull. He lay there, pinned under a hundredweight of shattered rock, and for a long moment, he didn't move. He couldn't. His mind was still replaying the image of the demon lord's hand, raised like a conductor's baton, and the beam that had followed. It had been beautiful, in a terrible way. A lance of pure darkness, so dense it seemed to drink the light around it. Leo's grenade launcher shot had simply vanished. The explosion hadn't even reached the demon lord's robes. "Think," Leo whispered, his voice a rasp in the dark. "Think, you idiot." He catalogued his body. Arms, functional, though his left shoulder screamed with every movement. Legs, pinned, but not broken. Chest, he could breathe, shallowly, which meant no ribs had punctured a lung. His head, intact, no blood in his mouth. He was alive. The demon lord had missed by a hair, and Leo had dug his own grave well enough to survive the blast. He began to dig. It took 10 minutes of clawing, coughing, and cursing before he broke the surface. The first thing he saw was the sky, a bruised purple where the beam's afterglow still shimmered. The second thing he saw was the hilltop, or rather, where the hilltop had been. A smoking crater, 50 feet wide, marked the spot where he'd stood. The rock had been vaporized, turned to glass that glittered like obsidian in the dying light. Leo dragged himself out of the trench and collapsed onto the scorched earth. He was covered in dirt and blood, his clothes torn, his skin peppered with small cuts from the flying debris. Any one of those cuts could have been a killing wound if the shrapnel had been larger. He laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "1 hit point," he muttered. "Still 1 hit point." He forced himself to his feet. The demon lord was out there, somewhere, and he wouldn't wait for Leo to recover. Leo's mind raced, calculating distances, angles, and probabilities. The fortress walls were a mile away, and the terrain between was a nightmare of open ground and scattered boulders. He couldn't outrun the demon lord. He couldn't outfight him. But he could outthink him. Leo reached into his inventory and summoned a smoke grenade. The familiar weight of the M18 was comforting in his hand. He pulled the pin, counted to 2, and threw it as far as he could. The canister bounced off a rock and exploded into a billowing cloud of white smoke. Leo didn't wait. He ran, crouching low, using the smoke as cover. He ran for 30 seconds before the smoke began to thin. He summoned another grenade, threw it, and kept moving. His lungs burned. His legs screamed. Every step was a gamble, a prayer that the demon lord's next beam wouldn't find him. But the beams didn't come. Leo glanced back and saw why. The demon lord was standing on the crater's edge, his dark robes billowing in the wind, his eyes scanning the smoke. He wasn't shooting because he couldn't see. Leo's lack of mana made him invisible to magical detection, and the smoke blocked line of sight. "You're not used to fighting blind, are you?" Leo whispered, a grim smile on his face. He kept running. The fortress walls grew larger, and the sound of horns echoed from the battlements. Reinforcements were arriving. Leo could see the glint of armor on the walls, the flash of spellfire as mages prepared their defenses. He was almost there. Just another 100 yards. The ground exploded behind him. Leo threw himself forward, landing hard on his shoulder as a dark beam carved a trench through the earth where he'd been running. He rolled, came up on his knees, and saw the demon lord advancing, his hand raised for another shot. The smoke was dissipating, and the demon lord had found his range. Leo didn't hesitate. He summoned the grenade launcher, aimed, and fired. The grenade arced high, not at the demon lord, but at the cliff face above him. The explosion sent a cascade of rock and debris tumbling down, forcing the demon lord to shield himself. It wouldn't stop him, but it bought Leo the seconds he needed. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted the last 50 yards. The fortress gate was opening, a narrow gap just wide enough for a man to slip through. Leo dove through the gap, landing on the cobblestones inside as the gate slammed shut behind him. He lay there, gasping, as soldiers rushed past him to reinforce the walls. A hand grabbed his collar and hauled him upright. Ilara's face swam into view, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and fury. "You're alive." "Barely," Leo croaked. "The demon lord, he's out there. He knows." "Knows what?" "That I'm mortal. That I can be killed." Ilara's grip tightened. "Then we need to get you inside. The walls won't hold him forever." Leo nodded, his legs barely supporting him. He let Ilara half-drag him into the fortress's main keep, where a fire was burning in the hearth and the air smelled of old stone and desperation. He collapsed into a chair, his body shaking with exhaustion. "What now?" Ilara asked. Leo stared into the flames. "Now we pray that the king's reinforcements arrive before the demon lord decides to knock down the walls." As if on cue, a horn sounded from the battlements, not a war horn, but a signal of arrival. Leo looked up as a soldier burst into the room. "Captain. A griffin rider has landed. He carries a message from the capital." Ilara exchanged a glance with Leo, then nodded. "Bring him in." The rider was a young man, his armor dusted with the grime of a long flight. He knelt before Ilara and held out a scroll sealed with the king's crest. "From His Majesty, King Aldrich. The royal army marches to reinforce Thornwall. They will arrive in 3 days." Relief washed through the room. Soldiers cheered, and Ilara let out a breath she'd been holding. But Leo saw the rider's face, the hesitation in his eyes. There was more. "What else?" Leo asked, his voice flat. The rider looked at him, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "The gun god. The king's aid comes with a condition. He has heard of your abilities. He offers full funding for the war effort, but in return, you must swear an oath of service for 1 more year." The room fell silent. Leo felt the weight of 100 eyes on him, the hope of a kingdom resting on his fragile shoulders. He thought of the demon lord, of the beam that had nearly killed him, of the long road ahead. 1 more year. A year of dodging death, of sleeping with one eye open, of fighting a war he hadn't asked for. He looked at Ilara, at the soldiers, at the fire that flickered in the hearth. Then he looked at his hands, the hands that could summon death from 1,000 yards, but could not take a single blow. 1 year, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'll do it. But even as he spoke, he knew the truth. 1 year was a lifetime when every day could be your last. And somewhere out there, in a castle of black stone, the demon lord was already planning his next move, searching for the weakness that would end the gun god forever. The griffin rider's boots had barely touched the stone of Thornwall's main courtyard before Leo was on him, his voice sharp as a blade. The king's envoy. Where? The rider, a young man with wind-tangled hair and the pale eyes of a highborn messenger, flinched at the intensity. He pointed a gauntlet hand toward the keep's great hall. Inside. He expects you, gun god. Leo didn't correct the title. He simply walked, his boots echoing off the cracked flagstones, his mind already racing through the terms he would demand. The hall was a cavern of shadows and torchlight, the long oak table scarred by goblin claws and the passage of desperate counsels. At its head stood a man in royal blue and silver, a signet ring glinting on his finger as he turned a goblet of wine. He was lean, with a hawkish nose and calculating eyes that missed nothing. Leo, the envoy said, his voice smooth as polished steel. I am Sir Aldrich Vane, personal secretary to His Majesty. I understand you have accepted the king's condition. Leo stopped 10 feet from the table, his hands empty but his posture coiled. I accepted a year of service. But service has a price. I need a phoenix feather and a hydra scale. Those are non-negotiable. Sir Aldrich's eyebrow rose a fraction. He set the goblet down with a deliberate click. Those are rare ingredients, gun god. The phoenix feather alone requires a raid into the ash wastes, where the sun burns through the clouds and the ground is cinders. The hydra scale, the last known hydra was slain a century ago. Its remains are in the royal vault. Then the king can open his vault, Leo said, his voice flat. I'm not asking for a kingdom. I'm asking for a chance to survive the next fight. The demon lord knows I'm mortal now. If I don't fortify my body, I'll be dead before the year is out, and your king loses his weapon. He let the words hang, watching the envoy's face. Sir Aldrich was good, his expression betrayed nothing, but Leo saw the slight tightening of his jaw. Good. He had leverage. After a long silence, Sir Aldrich nodded. The king anticipated such demands. He is willing to grant the phoenix feather and the hydra scale, but only after you prove your continued value. There is a target. The demon lord's top general, a man named Kalen Vex. He commands the forward army from a mountain fortress called the Obsidian Spire. He is the architect of the siege that nearly broke Thornwall. Kill him, and the ingredients are yours. Leo's pulse quickened, but his face remained stone. How do I get close? You don't get close, Sir Aldrich said, a thin smile playing on his lips. That's why we're paying you. The spire is warded against magic and manned by 100 elite soldiers. No assassin has ever reached Kalen's chambers. But you are not an assassin. You are a ghost. Find a perch, and send him to the abyss. Leo turned without another word. He had a mountain to climb. The journey to the Obsidian Spire took 2 days through the jagged spine mountains. Leo traveled light, carrying only a pack with climbing gear, a suppressed sniper rifle he called the Whisper, and a single box of .50 caliber armor-piercing rounds. He avoided the main roads, skirting through pine forests and scaling rocky outcrops, his eyes always scanning the sky for griffin patrols or worse. The air grew thin and cold as he ascended, and by the time he reached the base of the spire's cliff, his breath misted in the twilight. The spire was a monolith of black stone, jutting from the mountainside like a broken tooth. Its windows glowed with orange firelight, and Leo could see the silhouettes of sentries pacing along the battlements. He studied the structure through his scope, counting guards, noting patrol patterns. Kalen's balcony was on the 3rd level, overlooking a sheer drop of 300 feet. It was a position of arrogance, a man who believed himself untouchable. Leo smiled grimly. Arrogance was a bullet's best friend. He spent an hour scaling the cliff opposite the spire, using a climbing harness and pitons driven into the frozen rock. His fingers ached, and every gust of wind threatened to peel him off the stone, but he moved methodically, each placement deliberate. He could not afford a fall. One broken leg here meant death by exposure or discovery. He reached a narrow ledge at midnight, just as the moon crested the peaks. The ledge was barely wide enough for him to lie prone, but it offered a perfect sightline to Kalen's balcony. Leo set up his position, unfolding a bipod and settling the rifle's stock against his shoulder. He loaded a single round, the brass casing cold against his fingertips. Then he waited. An hour passed. 2. The cold seeped through his coat, numbing his extremities, but he forced himself to remain still. He breathed slow, shallow breaths, his eye pressed to the scope. The balcony doors were closed, the curtains drawn. But Leo knew patience. Kalen would show himself eventually. Generals like to survey their domain. At 3 in the morning, the doors opened. A figure stepped out onto the balcony, tall and broad-shouldered, clad in dark plate armor. A horned helm sat on his head, and he leaned against the railing, staring out at the moonlit peaks. Leo's finger rested on the trigger. He adjusted his aim by a hair, accounting for the wind. The crosshairs settled on the gap between the helm and the gorget, a sliver of exposed throat. He exhaled. Squeezed. The rifle coughed, a dull thud swallowed by the mountain wind. The bullet struck true. Kalen Vex jerked, then crumpled over the railing, a dark stain spreading across the stone. Leo did not wait to confirm. He began packing his gear, his movements fluid and practiced. The kill was clean. Now he just had to disappear. But as he slung the rifle over his shoulder and began his descent, a pulse of blue light erupted from the spire's peak. Alarm spells. The entire fortress blazed with magical energy, and Leo heard shouts in the guttural tongue of the demon lord soldiers. He rappelled faster, his boots scraping against the rock, but when he reached the base of the cliff, he saw them, a dozen mages on flying carpets, their robes billowing as they swept over the parapet. Their eyes locked onto him. Leo cursed. He sprinted for the tree-line, his lungs burning, as the first fireball streaked past his shoulder and exploded against a pine, showering him with splinters. The canyon walls blurred past Leo as he sprinted, his boots skidding on loose gravel. Behind him, the hum of enchanted carpets grew louder, punctuated by the crackle of spell fire. A bolt of lightning sizzled past his shoulder, scorching the air inches from his ear. He didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. His lungs burned. The .50 caliber rifle was slung across his back, but it was useless now, too slow to reload while running, too heavy to aim on the move. He needed something else. Something loud. He skidded around a corner, the canyon opening into a narrow gorge with a single stone bridge arching over a 50-foot drop. Perfect. He reached into his inventory, fingers closing around the cold metal of the M79 grenade launcher. He'd only used it once before, against a bandit camp. The recoil had nearly dislocated his shoulder. But he didn't have a choice. He dropped to one knee, braced the stock against his collarbone, and aimed at the bridge's keystone. The mages were rounding the bend now, their carpets weaving through the canyon like angry hornets. Their leader, a woman with silver hair and crackling gauntlets, pointed at him. He stopped. Fire at will. Leo pulled the trigger. The thump was deafening, the recoil slamming into his shoulder like a sledgehammer. The grenade arced through the air, trailing smoke, and struck the bridge's center. The explosion was a roar of stone and dust. The bridge buckled, cracked, and collapsed in a cascade of rubble, taking 2 of the carpets with it. The mages screamed as they plummeted into the chasm. But the remaining 6 didn't falter. They split formation, 3 diving low and 3 climbing high, their carpets weaving through the debris cloud. Leo cursed and ran. The canyon twisted ahead, narrowing into a dead-end cave. He saw it too late, the walls closing in, the ceiling sloping down until there was nowhere left to go. He stumbled to a halt at the cave's back wall, panting, his heart hammering against his ribs. The mages landed at the entrance, their carpets folding as they stepped off, spells already crackling in their hands. Nowhere to run, gun god, the silver-haired woman said, her voice dripping with contempt. You killed General Kalen. The demon lord will reward us handsomely for your head. Leo's mind raced. He had no cover. No escape route. 6 mages, all with ranged magic, all within 100 feet. Any one of their spells could kill him. He needed to end this in seconds. He needed firepower. He reached into his inventory and summoned the M134 minigun. The weapon materialized in his hands, its 6 barrels gleaming in the dim light. It was absurdly heavy, nearly 85 pounds, and the weight dragged his arms down. But he didn't have time to brace it properly. The mage's eyes widened as they recognized the weapon from their briefings. Kill him now, the silver-haired woman screamed. Leo pulled the trigger. The minigun roared to life, a deafening, mechanical shriek that drowned out everything. The barrels spun, spitting a stream of brass casings and fire. The first mage was torn apart before he could finish his incantation, his body shredded by the hail of lead. The second tried to raise a shield, but the bullets punched through it like paper, sending him sprawling in a spray of blood. The recoil was monstrous. Leo's arms felt like they were being wrenched from their sockets. He tried to adjust his aim, but the weapon bucked wildly, the vibration rattling his teeth. The third mage took a bullet to the thigh and collapsed, screaming. The fourth dove behind a rock outcropping, but Leo swept the gun across, chewing the stone to dust and a man with it. The silver-haired woman threw a bolt of lightning. It struck the minigun's housing, and Leo felt a jolt of electricity course through his arms. He gritted his teeth, refusing to let go. The barrels kept spinning, kept firing. He saw the fifth mage take a round to the chest, his robes exploding in a cloud of crimson. Then the pain hit. A sharp, sickening crack echoed from his right arm. The bone snapped under the relentless recoil, the forearm bending at an unnatural angle. Leo screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the minigun's roar. His grip faltered. The weapon dipped, spraying bullets into the cave floor, kicking up dirt and stone. The last mage, the silver-haired woman, was still alive, her hands raised, a sphere of crackling energy forming between her palms. Leo's vision blurred. The pain was white-hot, blinding. He couldn't aim. He couldn't think. But his body moved on instinct, his left hand fumbling for the Glock at his hip. He drew it, fired once. The bullet caught her in the throat. Her spell dissipated. She fell. The minigun clattered to the ground. Leo slumped against the cave wall, his broken arm hanging limp at his side. The world swam, colors bleeding into darkness. He heard footsteps, heavy, booted, echoing from the canyon. Adventurers? The fortress's reinforcements? He didn't know. He couldn't stay awake. The last thing he saw was the cave ceiling, rough and dark, before everything went black. Consciousness returned slowly, like rising through thick water. Leo blinked, his eyes adjusting to the soft glow of candlelight. He was lying on a cot, a thin blanket draped over him. The air smelled of incense and herbs. A stone ceiling arched above, carved with symbols he didn't recognize. He tried to move his right arm and felt a dull ache instead of the sharp agony he expected. He looked down. The arm was wrapped in white bandages, splinted with wooden braces. It was intact. Healed. You're awake. The voice was deep, resonant. Leo turned his head to see an elderly man in white robes, his face lined with age and wisdom. A silver pendant hung from his neck, a sunburst, the symbol of a healing deity. Where am I? Leo croaked, his throat dry. The Temple of Solaris, in Thornwall, the priest said. The adventurers found you in the canyon. You were barely alive. Your arm was shattered beyond repair. It took 3 high-ranking clerics to mend the bones. Leo sat up slowly, his muscles protesting. How long was I out? 2 days. The priest handed him a cup of water. Leo drank greedily. You're fortunate. The captain of the Thornwall adventurers, Elara, insisted we prioritize you. She said you had a contract to fulfill. Leo's mind cleared. The Hydra scale. The phoenix feather. He looked around the temple chamber, searching for a sign of the payment. The priest seemed to read his thoughts. He reached into his robe and produced a small wooden box, carved with intricate scales. This arrived this morning, delivered by the king's courier, the priest said, holding it out. A Hydra scale, harvested from the swamp of echoes. It's genuine. Powerful. Leo took the box with trembling hands. He opened it. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a scale the size of his palm. It shimmered with a deep, iridescent green, like sunlight on stagnant water. He could feel the latent magic radiating from it, a primal, ancient energy. He closed the box and looked at the priest. The phoenix feather. Is it here too? The priest nodded slowly. It arrived yesterday. Both components are now in the alchemist's possession. He's preparing the ritual as we speak. Leo let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Finally. After all the killing, all the close calls, he was one step away from being able to take a hit. One step away from not being a glass cannon. But the priest's expression was grave. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. There's something you must know, Leo. The ritual to combine the phoenix feather and hydra scale into a body-fortifying elixir is not simple. It requires more than ingredients. Leo's stomach tightened. What do you mean? The priest's eyes were unreadable. The ritual demands a willing sacrifice. 30 days of your lifespan. The magic has to be paid for in time. In life. Leo stared at him, the box cold in his hands. 30 days. A month of his life, gone. But what was a month compared to the alternative? A single scratch, a stray arrow, a lucky spell, and he was dead. He'd already come closer than he cared to count. He looked down at his bandaged arm, then back at the priest. When does the ritual start? The temple of Solaris was silent, save for the steady drip of holy water from a stone basin. Leo lay on a cold altar carved from white marble, his breath fogging in the chill air. The high priest, an old man named Theron with eyes like pale suns, stood over him, holding a clay bowl. Inside, the phoenix feather and hydra scale floated in a viscous golden liquid, their edges dissolving like sugar in water. Leo's right arm ached, even though the clerics had healed it. The memory of the minigun's recoil was still fresh in his bones, a brutal reminder that his body was a house of cards. He stared at the vaulted ceiling, tracing the cracks in the fresco of a sun god slaying a serpent. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat that seemed too loud in the sacred quiet. Are you certain? Theron asked, his voice low and resonant. This ritual will take 30 days from your lifespan. There is no reversal. Leo nodded, his throat dry. I'm sure. I'd rather live a shorter life than die tomorrow. Theron dipped a silver rod into the bowl, stirring the mixture. The liquid began to glow, casting dancing shadows across the temple walls. Leo felt a warmth spread through his chest, not painful, but unsettling, like a fever that promised to change him. He gripped the edges of the altar, his knuckles white. The priest began to chant in a language Leo didn't recognize, the words rolling like thunder in a distant storm. The golden liquid rose from the bowl, forming a shimmering orb that hovered above Leo's torso. He could feel its heat on his skin, a gentle pressure that grew into a weight, as if a great hand was pressing down on him. The phoenix feather and hydra scale, one from a creature of fire and rebirth, the other from a beast of water and resilience, began to merge. The orb split into two streams of light, one crimson, one azure. They spiraled around each other, weaving a cocoon of energy that enveloped Leo's body. He gasped. The warmth turned into a searing heat, then a cold that bit to the bone. His muscles contracted, his tendons stretched, and his bones groaned as if they were being reforged. He could feel the changes at a cellular level, his skin tightening, his sinews thickening, his skeleton hardening like steel being tempered. Theron's voice rose, the chant reaching a crescendo. The light flared, blinding Leo for a moment. He squeezed his eyes shut, and when he opened them, the glow was gone. The temple was quiet again, save for the drip of holy water. Leo sat up slowly. He flexed his fingers, then his arms. They felt heavier. More solid. He swung his legs over the edge of the altar and stood. The marble floor felt different under his bare feet, less cold, less hard. He punched his own chest with a closed fist. It didn't hurt. He did it again, harder. A dull thud, but no pain. It worked, he whispered, a grin spreading across his face. Theron nodded, his expression weary but satisfied. Your body is now as durable as a knight's plate armor. You can withstand a few blows, but do not mistake this for invincibility. A well-aimed arrow to the eye, a blade through the heart, these will still kill you. I know, Leo said. He looked at his hands, turning them over. The skin was the same, but it felt tougher, like leather. He summoned his Glock 19, the familiar weight in his palm. He pressed the barrel against his forearm and pulled the trigger. The bang echoed through the temple. Theron flinched, but Leo didn't. The bullet lodged in his skin, a shallow wound that bled for a second before clotting. He plucked it out with his fingers, watching the flesh knit itself back together. Not fast enough for combat, but it was a start. He laughed, a sound that surprised him. It was raw, almost manic, the laugh of a man who had been walking a tightrope over a pit of spikes and had just been handed a safety net. He holstered the gun and turned to Theron. Thank you. Thank the gods, the priest said. And remember, you owe them 30 days of your life. Use them wisely. Leo left the temple, stepping into the cool night air. The stars were out, bright and cold. He walked to the edge of the city wall, looking out at the dark forest beyond. Somewhere out there, the demon lord's forces were gathering. He could feel it in his bones, his new, stronger bones. He drew a deep breath, the scent of pine and earth filling his lungs. For the first time since he had been dragged into this world, he felt something other than fear. He felt anticipation. In a distant castle, a shadowy figure stood before a scrying pool. The water rippled, showing Leo's silhouette against the starry sky. The demon lord smiled, his teeth glinting like daggers. "Good," he murmured. "He's worth hunting now. Send the Shadow Legion." Behind him, a dozen black-armored knights knelt, their eyes glowing with crimson light. They rose as one, silent and deadly, and vanished into the night. Leo felt a chill run down his spine, but he didn't know why. He shook it off and headed back to the inn. Tomorrow, he would test his new limits. Tomorrow, he would start hunting back.